Welcome back to another Kray video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any videos. And for people really into the Krays, join our private Facebook group, Krays Crime Lords of London, where you will find stuff probably unavailable anywhere else. We're an established group with a large membership, and best of all, we're friendly. The link is in the YouTube description section.
Hello, my name is Norman Lucas. I am a British crime journalist and author, known for my work covering high-profile criminal cases and gangland figures. I worked as a crime correspondent for the Sunday Mirror newspaper and wrote several books on true crime subjects. As a crime reporter for the Sunday Mirror, I covered significant crime stories in Britain. I had cultivated sources and contacts within the criminal underworld. Undercover, I worked my way into the inner circle of the notorious Kray twins to gather information for my reporting. Through my books and newspaper reporting, I provided the public with detailed accounts of some of the most shocking and notable crimes in British history, helping to shape public understanding of true crime and its perpetrators. I hope you enjoy my story. There was a complete change in the pattern of gangsterism in Glasgow after World War II. Although young tearaways were responsible for periodic stabbings, and bands of youths in the few remaining slum areas roamed the streets, brandishing improvised weapons, the big gangs were never reformed. The general standard of housing was radically improved, and city planning catered for the dispersal of population so that large numbers of people were not concentrated within small areas. Protection rackets and petty crime were controlled by small, almost unorganized groups of villains, and for some years after World War II, criminal statistics reflected a welcome downward trend. In 1947, 869 assaults upon persons, murders, sex offenses, and robberies were recorded, but the figure dropped to 573 in 1953. The 1960s suddenly brought another swing of the pendulum, and in 1962, a large gang, the Tongs, began to emerge in Calton. Like those between the wars, many of the gang members were in their teens. Unlike their forebears, however, they could not advance unemployment, poverty, and idleness as an excuse for their violence, nor was it a psychological outlet from a day-to-day existence of boredom. Offenders told sociologists that every youngster had to belong to a gang for his own protection. Today, the gangs are growing in strength, and during 1964, 600 cases of assault and attempted murder were reported, while by 1967, the figure had more than doubled to 1,282. Glasgow Royal Infirmary expects every weekend to treat about 250 casualties from gang fights and an average of 50 seriously assaulted people per week. Perhaps the most depressing epitaph to all the efforts of local councils and social workers comes in this quote from a publican in the Gorbals: "Violence is a way of life here. You'll never get rid of it. It's in our blood." The Roaring Twenties, the era of the flappers, the years that saw the introduction of serious drug addiction, was also the period in which London gangsterism was born and nourished. There were rich profits for certain unscrupulous men who were in reality the forerunners of the highly organized teams of underworld operators, many of whom are today incarcerated in the country's top security jails. It was to be expected that the nation's capital should become the headquarters of the country's underworld. Immediately after World War I, money flowed freely in London's West End, especially in Soho, within the area bounded by Oxford Street, Charing Cross Road, Shaftesbury Avenue and Regent Street, a district which was to become known as London's Square Mile of Vice. Bottle parties were in vogue. Every spare cellar in Soho, no matter how sleazy or squalid, bore a club label and was nightly packed to capacity by men and women with money to squander. The wild ones of the age blamed their extravagances upon a natural desire to celebrate freedom from 4 years of war. The profits of illegal drinking clubs that remained open throughout the afternoon, as well as the takings of public houses, cafes and expensive restaurants in Mayfair, rocketed, and like gulls behind a ship, the criminals followed in the wake of the wealthy. They saw scope for rich pickings. A large-scale protection racket operation was launched within months of the armistice being signed, and the owners of fashionable clubs and restaurants were given no opportunity to plead that business was not as good as the gangsters alleged. The protectors had planted their own stooges in these establishments, often as doormen, so that they had first-hand accurate reports of trade from the inside. It became obvious to the villains that there was also big money to be made out of vice, and many a gangster set up his own stable of prostitutes. They installed the women in small flats in the West End, and they paid the rents and took 65% of the women's earnings. They also opened and controlled illegal gambling dens called spielers, where it was almost impossible for anyone to win money. The prostitutes got commission for steering wealthy clients into these spielers, and if a gambler had the skill to beat the crooked card dealers and croupiers, there were always on hand professional dips, pickpockets, waiting to lift his temporary winnings. If the victim protested against being robbed, there were always 2 or 3 heavies, thugs, waiting in dark alleys outside to teach him a lesson in proper behavior. Blackmailers had their place in the crime scene between the wars, and their activities centered mainly upon the prostitution racket. The method was always the same. If a vice girl found that her client was a prominent man, she would endeavor to persuade him to visit her again. But before he made the second visit, she would inform the gang. On the client's second visit, 2 members of the gang would be concealed on the premises and watch the couple's progress through hidden spy holes. As soon as the man was in a compromising position, the 2 blackmailers would burst into the room and take a flashlight picture of the scene. In some cases, the actual negatives would be sold to the wealthy victims for large sums of cash. In other instances, victims would be bled, sometimes for several years, before the negatives were finally handed over. By the beginning of the 30s, London gang chiefs were reputedly taking profits totaling £1 million per year out of their various so-called business ventures. At a later stage, 7 main gangs were controlling various branches of crime in London. In Hoxton, there was the Titanic team, largely composed of burglars and pickpockets. It was extremely well organized, and each member made a contribution into a fund every week, so that if any operator was convicted and jailed, there was sufficient cash in the kitty to take care of his dependents while he was away. The Angel Boys, the King's Cross Mob, and the Clerkenwell Gang were all friendly and formed a solid front against anyone attempting to muscle in on their rackets, which embraced almost every type of villainy. The East End gang were specialists in stealing motor cars and doctoring them so that they could not easily be recognized. And in Camden Town, a gang boss whom Britain was to come to know well, Billy Hill, was forming his own organization, mainly of highly skilled burglars and housebreakers. Perhaps the most notorious gang in the early 30s was the Elephant Mob, all drawn from the Elephant and Castle area of South London. According to Billy Hill, they were the best hoisters, shoplifters in the business. Their gang was a syndicate of shoplifters and smash-and-grab raiders, with each member carrying a rank commensurate with his or her ability. For its long and successful reign and continuous prosperity, it depended upon a string of exceptionally efficient receivers. The Elephant Mob had the freedom of London so far as other gangs were concerned, primarily because it was so well established and admired by everyone in the underworld. The mob divided London among its members. They were allotted certain districts to work, and the leaders were often seen being chauffeured around London in high-powered cars on reconnaissance trips. The gang's laborers were caught from time to time, but owing to the size of the gang, its strength was around 70 or 80. It was never seriously depleted by a lack of man or woman power. New blood for the Elephant Mob was recruited from among the sons and daughters of those already connected with the gang. Membership was virtually hereditary because so many of the gang's chiefs were interrelated, and it was a matter of parental pride for a youngster to be enlisted. Although some of the Elephant Mob were accomplished burglars and pickpockets, the gang specialized in shoplifting, and its activities in this sphere were organized in great detail. The routine was usually the same: 2 or 3 chauffeur-driven cars, each one containing 4 women, would park in the West End. The women were usually fairly small and wore the long, loose coats, fashionable during the period. The cars would halt outside large stores and wait, a plan which it would be impossible to execute today because of parking restrictions. 2 women remained in each car to watch for the police. The others went into the shops and emerged looking far more rotund than when they had entered. Around their waists, hooked onto webbing belts, were shoes, handbags, dresses, furs, and various items of lingerie. Hardly had the cars glided away from the curbsides than the hoisters would start unloading their hauls. The cars usually visited 3 or 4 shops per day, and then headed back to the gang's headquarters in the Elephant and Castle district to hand in their loot. That was the standard procedure. At this time, gangs throughout London were continually fighting for supremacy, but no matter how bitter they felt towards each other, in their feuds, they remained united against their common enemy, the police. Week after week, men were maimed in battles for territorial rights, but whenever victims were found bleeding and helpless in the gutter, they would never shop their attackers to the police. The gangs had their own laws. The victors of one day might well be the vanquished of another, and without the necessary evidence, the police were powerless to arrest the leaders of the organized gangs. During the 20s and the early 30s, the gangsters of London's West End began to spread to the race courses. Throughout the war years, 1914 to 1918, the numbers of race meetings had been drastically curtailed, so that when the war ended, racing, like every other brand of entertainment, came into its own again and enjoyed a boom period. It was an open invitation for the mobsters to move in. The authorities, such as the Jockey Club, soon recognized that a race gang menace was building up to a degree unknown before the war. The methods of these race gangs were an extension of the evil old-time system whereby bodyguards were engaged by unscrupulous bookmakers willing to pay out winnings only when they had done well. The strong-arm men were retained to deal with any complainants. In the modern system, it was the bookmakers who became the victims. Toughs would approach bookmakers and demand sums of protection money for allowing them to carry on business undisturbed. A refusal to pay produced varied punishments. A defaulter was either beaten up at the end of the meeting, or pseudo-fights would be organized near his pitch so that nobody could approach to place a bet. The bookmaker just couldn't win. While gangs from London and its environs operated on courses in the south, other gangs were active in the Midlands and the north. By 1925, the situation had reached the stage when no bookmaker could work on any race course unless he paid a minimum of £25 per day to his protectors. As the profits extracted from the bookies grew, so intensive warfare developed between gangs vying for the power to protect clients in given territories. A great deal of money and some terrorism had to be dispensed in order to persuade witnesses not to help the police when officers intervened in these gang battles. The opposing forces met in a public house opposite Waterloo Station. Bar stools flew and the fighting surged over into a hairdresser's shop. Surprised and terrified customers were helpless as windows were smashed, doors ripped from their hinges, and furniture wrecked. Women with their hair in curlers rushed screaming into the street. Locked together, the gangs spilled out onto the pavement. Pedestrians were scattered, and buses and trams were halted. A large force of police officers was rushed to the area, but few arrests were made because the gangsters had fled before the police arrived. The situation had become so desperate on the race courses that the Jockey Club in 1925 seriously considered banning race meetings on courses where gangs were likely to make trouble. But the stewards decided that if this action were taken, the gangs would merely step up their operations on other courses. The ban would thus be futile. All the efforts of the Home Secretary and the police to combat the race gang evil came to naught, and towards the end of 1925, the Jockey Club itself decided to take action to beat the crooks. After a series of meetings between the police and racecourse officials, a counter-organization was established. It was headed by Major Weimer, DCO, who had considerable military experience and had undergone a certain amount of police training. Working in close cooperation with the police and the National Hunt Committee, Major Weimer began to purge the official enclosures of pickpockets, Welshers, and protection mobsters. But a tough problem confronted the organization where local gangs were well entrenched, particularly in Birmingham, Sheffield, Manchester, and Glasgow. Bath and Salisbury were also noted black spots, and Windsor, Sandown, and Newmarket badly needed to be cleaned up. According to the records, the first really strong racecourse gang emanated from Birmingham. It was led by one William Kimber, and colloquially it was called the Brummagem Boys. Composed exclusively of crooks, the gang became rich enough to establish a secondary headquarters in Islington. They formed a slightly uneasy alliance with the Hoxton mob. Until the Brummagem Boys moved into London, they and the Atoxeter and Leeds teams had only controlled racecourses in the Midlands and North. Their arrival in the capital heralded plans to extend their tentacles over courses in the south and their ambitions seemed to be on the way to success until the advent of Charles, known as Darby Sabini, and his brothers Harry and Joseph. The Sabini boys emerged from Saffron Hill, London's Italian quarter. They were Italians, and Charles Sabini was reputedly a member of the notorious Mafia, the Sicilian secret society, which had, even in those days, started to grow into an international crime syndicate with a very strong foothold in the United States. Sabini and his gang, around 50 strong, began to circulate at race meetings in the South. His men not only carried what had become the routine weapons of those days, but also firearms. At first, the Brumagem boys, after several encounters with the Sabinis, agreed to return to their own territory. But after some months, they could not resist the challenge to move in on the Sabinis when they realized that the Italians' ground was yielding far richer pickings than their own haunts in the Midlands and the North. The Sabinis were netting thousands of pounds by protecting bookmakers and also by claiming fictitious winnings. But it so happened that the occupants were not the Sabini gang at all. Actually, they were members of the Leeds gang, friends of the Brummagem boys. Discovering their mistake, the Birmingham villains rushed back to their waiting coach and drove off, but they were stopped in the car park of a public house in Kingston by Scotland Yard flying squad officers who had been tailing the lorry. 23 men were arrested and later jailed. It was the Battle of Bath race course that finally settled the rivalries between the Birmingham and London gangs. The Sabinis won the battle, and the Brummagem mob retired from the territory forever. While the Sabinis had been expanding their interests on the racecourses, they had also been extending their operations in the West End and in the underworld generally. A lone burglar or common thief who made a rich haul always received a call from one of the Sabinis, who demanded a percentage of his loot as their price for silence. But the Sabinis were not allowed unchallenged supremacy for long. The Hoxton gang had been getting stronger for some time, and eventually they considered themselves sufficiently powerful to challenge the Sabinis. Thus, frequent bloody battles took place between the two mobs over a number of years, and then in July 1936, 30 members of the Hoxton gang went to Lewes races expressly to maim 2 members of Darby Sabini's gang. 16 of these men were arrested and subsequently appeared at Lewes assizes. There they were sentenced to a total of 53 years in jail. The curtain came down upon the Hoxton Sabini show for the last time. Major Weimer and most of his men had been attacked and injured by various gangs, but with the help of the police, they registered a certain measure of success in cleaning up the race courses throughout the country. A long series of prosecutions resulted in fairly stiff prison sentences being imposed upon racecourse thugs, and gradually the terror began to diminish. It was the Second World War that finished the Sabini gang. In 1939, the Italian brothers were interned as enemy aliens. After the war, Darby Sabini reappeared as a small-time bookmaker for a short time, but eventually retired and died a natural death in his home in Hove, Sussex, in October 1950. That's all for this episode, my friends. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section.